targeting those people who are in violation of the law. We have been able to identify some of the most dangerous people on our street. I'm not sending my agents out, just one or two of them. We send out at least half a dozen at any one time. We certainly do have tools at our disposal to be more aggressive when necessary.
So this sounds like it makes sense, all right? What former Attorney General and now Senator from California, Kamala Harris, was referring to is the Armed and Prohibited Persons List. Now, what she is saying is that there's a group of people out there. These are the dregs of humanity. They are the worst of the worst, the criminal element in the state of California, and they have guns. We have to send armed agents, at least half a dozen at a time, in order to confiscate those guns from those individuals who are, in fact, the dregs of humanity. Let's find out a little bit more from Senator Harris, then Attorney General Harris, exactly who is on this list.
We keep a list of people who have registered to buy a firearm. Separately, we keep a list of people who've been convicted of a felony and are therefore prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm. Separately, we keep a list of people who been found by a court to be mentally ill and therefore prohibited from owning a firearm. So what we did is we merged those lists, because clearly if somebody is on one or more of those lists, they are likely to pose a great deal of threat to the safety of their family, their neighborhood, and the community at large.
So let's talk a little bit about this list. Now, the reason why we're talking about this is because there was a recent article in the Los Angeles Times that talked about how there are 10,000 people who are barred from owning guns, but in fact are still armed. And oh my gosh, we have to do something about this. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to turn to our good friend Gavin Gun Grabbing Newsom, and his law, Proposition 63, is going to save the day. Right? That's exactly where they're going. So first of all, let's talk about the Armed and Prohibited Persons List. Now, first and foremost, the list, once again, at one time was over 20,000, right? And it was over 20,000, number one, because the California Department of Justice didn't know how to administer the list. They weren't doing anything to try and take guns away from actual criminals. What they were doing was, well, once again, not managing the list. For example, she talked about how, well, you're a criminal if you're convicted of a crime. That's how you wind up on the list. And that is true. If you're convicted of a felony, your name goes on the list. There are certain misdemeanors that are prohibiting, that cause you to lose your rights for a specified period of time. She said there's the people who are, quote unquote, mentally ill. That's not exactly a good description, because in essence, if you've ever been held involuntarily, meaning if you've ever been on an involuntary 3-day hold, well, guess what? Your name goes on the list, right? Also, if there's a warrant out for you. So let's say, for example, you have a speeding ticket and you miss your court date. A bench warrant is issued for your arrest, and you are now on the list. You are now prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm as long as that warrant is out there. Now, what they don't tell you, or what they didn't tell you, is that at one point there were over 10,000 people on the list who shouldn't have even been on the list. We're not talking about not just people who temporarily had their rights removed, but, oh, by the way, should have never been on the list in the first place. Now, you don't think it can happen? Think about this. Just close your eyes and imagine this. You're sitting at home. You're just got through watching TV, or you're watching TV with the family, just relaxing, chilling. Knock comes at the door. You go to answer it, and there is at least, according to Kamala Harris, at least half a dozen law enforcement agents armed to the teeth, and they say that they are there to take your guns. You have no idea what they're talking about. You've done nothing. You've not done anything to violate the law. Sound like it couldn't happen to you? Yeah, well, that's exactly what this guy thought.
And Carla answered the front door and said, there's some policemen at the front door for you.
Mike Merritt says it was the evening of November 5th. The officer came in.
And then he said, you own this gun, this gun, this gun. Then I thought, they're here to get my guns for some reason.
I said, get out of here. You need to leave and come back with a warrant. And they said, if we leave, he's going to jail.
Carla Merritt says it didn't seem right, but they let the officers take the guns.
Yeah, I took everything.
His weapons, his wife's, ammo, everything.
So what they don't talk about is the number of people who are tied up on this list who shouldn't even be on there. All right. So here's the number. So first of all, there were a couple of different audits that were done, and there were a couple of things that the state auditor noted about there were problems with the list. Number one was that in many cases, many of the courts weren't reporting, and for the most part, most of them who were reporting late, meaning something happens, you're supposed to get your firearms rights back, whether it is a temporary restraining order. That's right, even temporary individuals with temporary restraining orders. Yeah, you get a temporary restraining order, your name goes into apps. The temporary restraining order is lifted, you're supposed to get your rights back. Well, not if the court is not reporting it, right? They found that most of the mental health facilities were not reporting on time. Most of the courts were not reporting on time. They found that when it came to actually investigating and looking through the list of people who were on there, they weren't double checking social security numbers. So if you had the same name as somebody who was in the apps list, well, guess what? You were not. If you had the same name, well, guess what? You could get caught up in this thing, and you could wind up getting caught up in a raid. The funniest thing was that they found that probably right around 10,000 people that were in apps weren't supposed to be there. A bunch of them were people who had already had their rights restored. They had already, for one reason or another, their rights were either it was temporary, or it was the wrong name, or in some cases, we're talking about people who had traffic tickets. That was 1,000 of them were people who just had traffic warrants out. These are the people. These are the hardened criminals that were on this list. You see all the time. You see these stories all the time, where they're talking about all the firearms that they've, all the instances where they've confiscated these firearms. But every single time we've asked, and every single time it's been asked of them, well, what about the individuals whose firearms you've had to give back? What about them? Why don't you tell us a little bit about them? You know what they have to say? They have to say absolutely nothing, because as far as they're concerned, well, it doesn't happen.
A few days later, one of the agents calls.
I said, what for? Are you going to give me my guns back? I was being smart. They said, yes, we are. He never said what the mistake was. He just said, we made a mistake. It was our fault.
It's a loss of your liberty, of your rights.
I almost fainted and passed out when they said they wanted all my guns.
Yeah, he was a mess.
So notice in this story, there was absolutely nothing from the California Department of Justice. They didn't talk about the mistake that they made. There was a case in Fresno where they confiscated over 500 firearms. It made all the news. But guess what didn't happen? What didn't happen was you didn't see any report of it. You didn't see any notification of it. You didn't see anybody say when they returned the firearms, you didn't see anybody in the mainstream media talking about it. But even these problems with this sort of thing, this is nothing new for the mainstream media. I mean, one only has to look at all of the reports that are out there where individuals have lost their rights or had their firearms taken, or where they're doing a horrible job of getting firearms from individuals who aren't supposed to have them. It is outrageous. So, in other words, real criminals are walking the streets. They're keeping their firearms. But if you're a law-abiding citizen, well, you lose your rights. It's so bad that this is no mystery. Even members of the California state legislature know that it's a problem. And in fact, they talked about it ad nauseum before they put forth $24 million to the California Department of Justice in order to supposedly solve this problem.
Most of the people who are in the class that this bill describes are people who were convicted of misdemeanors, and most of them don't know that they're not able to have the gun because the court never told them when they were there in the first place. It might be prudent that before we send out the ninja squad, we might want to send them a letter and say that, dear sir, you understand that your plea on April 12th placed you in a prohibited class. You now have to show that you either got rid of the gun and or you sold it, or bring it to us. And if you don't do that in a period of time, we're going to come and collect the gun. Many of the people who are in this group have actually surrendered the weapon to a sheriff's department or a local police officer. One of the problems is that the local police officers don't upload the information to the Department of Justice system. What's clear is that what we're doing is silly, and what we should do is fix the
Right. What we should do is fix the system. And that's one thing that they've never, ever, ever, ever done. Right now, there are still people being added to the armed prohibited persons list who, by the way, in some cases, are people who should not have firearms. I will wholly and fully admit that. But many of whom are individuals who either have only temporarily lost their ability to own a firearm. And by the way, they're on it, and Lord knows when their names are going to get off. And in many cases, as the senator pointed out, they don't even know. You're not told when you're convicted of a felony, oh, by the way, you have to give up your guns, or certain misdemeanors. When you get a restraining order against you, nobody tells you that, oh, by the way, you've lost your right to own a firearm. Or if you have a traffic warrant, no one tells you. You're supposed to just know. You're supposed to just know. So now they've made a criminal of you without even telling you. And so now you have this article in the Los Angeles Times about 10,000 dangerous people. How many of them are really people? First of all, let's just break this down, okay? Most criminals are not buying their guns from a gun store. They're just not. So what are the chances they are going to be an APHIS in the system that tracks legal gun purchases? If I'm going out to commit a crime with a firearm, I am not going to go to the gun store to purchase my gun. That is just stupid. Now, while there are stupid criminals, not all criminals are stupid. So let's not set the baseline at, oh, by the way, all criminals are stupid. Let's at least deal with what makes some common sense. And so now they want to say, well, Proposition 63 will take guns out of the hands of convicted criminals. Well, first of all, understand that Proposition 63 has nothing to do with apps. Proposition 63 simply says that local law enforcement and probation will conduct a search, they will develop a process, or they have a process. That's evidently what the bill says. It requires a process by which they will confiscate the firearms of people who are convicted of crimes for which they are prohibited. But there's nothing in the bill that actually makes sure that they don't have firearms. There's absolutely nothing. Gavin Newsom did absolutely nothing to consult with local law enforcement when he introduced this bill. He just simply, into Proposition 63, he just did it. And he has absolutely no idea he has no idea how it is going to be implemented. And guess what? Neither does local law enforcement. Neither does the California Department of Justice. They have absolutely no idea how they're going to implement it. And yet and still, gun grabbing, Gavin Newsom still pushing his will. Anyway, yeah, I wanted you guys to know and understand, when you hear people talk about apps and you talk about this revolutionary system that we have here in California, let me just tell you, what's that saying? A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Well, when the weakest link is a government bureaucrat in the California Department of Justice, or a lieutenant governor whose, quite frankly, only job is to wake up in the morning and find out if the governor is still alive, when those are your weakest links, then you have a system that has failed, will continue to fail, and really has no hope of doing anything but subverting the rights of law-abiding citizens. Anyway, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Want to let you guys know that today we're broadcasting from Sacramento, but the next couple of days we're actually going to be at SHOT there in Vegas. So if you guys are going to be tuning in, here's what I'd like you to do. If there's something in particular that you know, or someone in particular you know is going to be at SHOT that you'd like to have us talk to or interview, put it in the comments section here. Send us a message. If we can catch up to them, if we can meet them, we'll do so. Because, hey, after all, we're here. This is a conversation. We're trying to do stuff and have stuff here on Coffee that you guys want to hear about and that you guys want to talk about. So please do that for us. You guys take care. Have a good time. Remember, This is the home of the fight for civil rights. We got to use them or we're going to lose them. We'll see you tomorrow, or who knows, maybe tonight.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.